All right, now here's the scoop. Alex here is 17, things are convoluted, to put the least mildly. My mom is the starting point for everything. When I was barely 7 years old, she died. It was tough. Losing her created a void in my life that never completely closed. But I had no idea then that she left me something substantial. Furthermore, I mean large. Let us not leap ahead, though. A few years after she went, my dad remarried. When I was almost 9, he and Rachel tied the wedding. Rachel arrived carrying Madison, her daughter. Rachel's fine, but she is most definitely the kind who overdoses the entire cool mom performance. Madison, on the other hand, is a year younger than me. Hence, let's say our views are not quite aligned. She believes that everything should simply come to her without regard to questioning. Then there is my 5-year half-brother, Jake. Since he is still young, there is no drama here. Still, it was last year, and I discovered the money then fast forward. It all began with a sobering conversation on Mom's side between my grandparents. To be honest, I assumed they would continue on about education or drop some life guidance or something. No, they knocked me with a bombshell. I apparently will inherit somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million when I turn 18. Indeed, I was startled. As it happens, back in the day, my grandparents were some quite major business people. They started a business, made a lot of money, sold it off, and placed the earnings into a trust fund for me. In case something happened, they wanted to be sure I would be looked for. Well, my mother also had that same thought. My mother's scheme was a full-on future-proof arrangement, not only some minimum safety net. She worked with my grandparents to ensure that money was set aside exactly for me, as she understood things could get messy. Not for Madison here, not for Jake specifically, not even with Dad in mind. Just me here. My grandparents have been handling it since she went, keeping it safe, and most importantly, keeping Dad totally in the dark about exactly how much was truly there. Also crucial was the timing of this small revelation. My grandparents thought it was time I knew to be ready. Their last wish was for me to reach 18 without knowing what to do with that kind of money. They clarified that my mother arranged everything to ensure my future would be safe. Only mine, not that of anyone else. I was therefore not really eager to tell Dad about it. I assumed he was already comfortable with it since he knew it was there. Number one mistake. We were hanging out one evening when I stated casually that after I reached 18 I would be making a reasonable amount of money. I said it was a good chunk, not even precise. His response was, let's assume he found it difficult. His face changed from serene to totally shocked. He simply sat there, jaw wide, staring at me, as if the color washed out of his face. He started probing me right away over the specifics, how much, where it was coming from, who was in charge of it. I responded to him sincerely, as at the time I gave little thought to it. After looping Rachel into it a few days, everything started to go south. They seated me as though we were engaged in some kind of intervention. Rachel pointed out how Madison had great aspirations of attending law school and how she cannot afford it on her alone. So suddenly it was all about family and sharing the wealth. They also included Jake into the mix, discussing how he just is 5 now but will eventually need college funds as well. They also evidently believed my inheritance ought to cover it all. Hearing all this, seated there, I could hardly believe my ears. My grandma and mom saved this money. Now they expected me to simply turn it over? I told them straightforwardly that it was not going to happen. Designed for me, this was the bequest of my mother. Rachel, though, was not having it. She went on a protracted tirade about how selfish I was being, and how unfair it was that I would save that type of money for myself while my siblings might have it to transform their lives. While I sat there shocked, my dad simply nodded along, as her reasoning seemed perfect. Rachel persisted, guilt trip after guilt trip directed at me. She kept repeating things like, "How could you even think about squandering all that money on yourself when you could improve someone else's life?" Still, I was not buying it. Never for them was it about family. It has to do with acquiring my inheritance. I so stayed my ground. Tell them it wasn't going to happen. If that infuriated them, then so be it. At home, the atmosphere then dropped sharply. Rachel and my dad hardly spoke to me, and when they did, it was tense and strained. One night, I overheard Rachel advise Madison not to worry, that they would figure out what they needed. They obviously hoped they could guilt trip me, bring me down. But what they didn't know was that, despite their own ideas for it, I was about to let my mom's legacy slide through my hands. After that blow-up on the money, home life went from awkward to downright unpleasant. You would understand if you have ever found yourself in a scenario where you could simply sense others murmuring about you behind your back. Rachel and my dad were behaving shittily, as though they were waiting for me to slip off or something. Madison, too, was not exactly improving the matter. Every time I entered a room, it went dead quiet. Like I was some villain for not wanting to turn over my fortune, they would all just gaze at me. It was not embarrassing. Rachel then decided one day to attempt yet another strategy. She sidled up to me as I was in the kitchen trying to assemble a sandwich. "Alex, I believe you are making a mistake here. You are young, and you do not yet appreciate family. Helping your siblings becomes more vital than any sum of money when you get older." I looked at her, not knowing if I wanted to laugh or become angry. I said to her, "They are not siblings. Madison is not even blood related. Jake, well, he is my half-brother, but this money has nothing to do with them." Rachel's face became as stone. She resembled what I had just hit her with, but come on. Was I meant to simply roll over since she had on her concerned parent? She persisted in discussing how family is more than simply blood and how I should show some sympathy. But I wasn't finding purchase in it. I knew this was really another attempt to make me feel awful, so I would consent to getting the money. It was the same old pattern. Load me with guilt, make me feel selfish, and pray I would cave. My dad and I had a major blowout a week or so following that. Looking back, perhaps I should have seen it approaching, but at the time I felt he would have eventually let it go. He got home from work one night, and I sensed something was wrong. He seldom asked anything, even how my day went. Rather, he only stated, "Alex, we need to talk," with that austere dad voice typically associated with danger. We then settled in the living room, and he began gently, as though he were trying to be reasonable. "Alex," he added, "I know you're young and might not totally know what you're doing with this money. Madison truly needs help for college. Hence, I'm not saying you have to give all of it away. Jake, well, he has a career ahead of him also." I could feel the wrath boiling inside, but I tried to keep cool since you could do something wonderful for them. "Dad," I informed him, "this isn't my responsibility. You and Rachel have to work out Madison's college costs as well as Jake's future. That is on you, not me." Then he snapped. Full-on snapshot. Something he nearly never did. He started screaming. "For you, Alex, I have done everything. Raised, fed, clothes you, covered your head with a roof, and this is your return to me." Through selfish behavior. Though it was difficult, I sat there trying to retain my calm. Here he was, essentially claiming that I owed him my inheritance, since he did the very minimum required of a parent. I said straightforwardly, "This money comes from Mom and my grandparents. They put it especially for me in order." And that's when he mentioned the one thing that truly set me off. "You don't get to dictate what I do with it." Looking at me, he continued, "Your mom wouldn't have wanted you to turn your back on your family like this." That ached, but I knew it was untrue. She would have wanted you to share. Mom built that trust to ensure I wouldn't have to cope with this kind of pressure. She held the money down until I was 18, since she understood something like this would happen. Breathing deeply, I continued, "If Mom wanted me to share, she would have arranged it that way. She lacked, nevertheless. She left it for me." Then, for days, he said nothing else. Rachel was not talking to me either, which was not really a loss. Still, the home felt as if one large, cold shoulder. I would get one-word responses, or they would simply ignore me completely if I tried to strike up a discussion. They seemed to be treating me in my own house as a foreigner. Madison chose to get more audacious in meantime. She complained about me to Rachel in her room, and I heard her. She said, "I'm not sure why he won't simply give me the money. It's not as though he will be using all of it. The entitlement was practically ridiculous. He could at least help with tuition." She discussed my inheritance as though it were some family bank account just waiting for her to access any time she needed it. Though I knew it wouldn't change anything, part of me wanted to walk right in and straighten her. She was exactly as fixed in her ideas as Rachel and Dad were. Then Rachel decided to bring in a lawyer just as I felt things could not get any more crazy. Yes, a legal attorney. I saw right through her claim that she simply wanted to explore all the options and make sure everything was being handled fairly. This was merely another fear tactic meant to try to force me to part from some of the money. Rachel put up a great show when the attorney arrived at the house, behaving as though this was some sort of crucial conference. There was my dad as well, but he kept quiet so Rachel could speak most of the time. She persisted in saying how they only wanted to make sure Alex understands the legal side of things, and how they were concerned about how this money was being distributed. The lawyer, however, didn't appear interested in lending them assistance. He told them somewhat bluntly that their options were limited. Set up by my grandmother and mother, the money was in a trust and impregnable. Something would only change if I chose to do it. Rachel was enraged, and I knew this wasn't the response she wanted, but the attorney quickly closed her down. Rachel then gave up on even acting politely. She hardly spoke to me at all, not even turned to face me as I entered the room. To be honest, I gave no thought at all. If it were her desired state of affairs, then all okay by me. Less I had to cope with her would be preferable. I knew by now things would never be the same. Just a few months away, my 18th birthday was causing me to experience increasing stress. Everyone seemed to be just waiting for that day, hoping I would have second thoughts. Still, I was not going to move. I started spending more time at my grandparents' place to cut off all the drama. They were encouraging. My grandpa even made jokes about putting a restraining order on my dad and Rachel should they keep prodding. Having them on my side seemed right. Deep down, though, I knew that once I turned 18, things would get absolutely insane. Everything simply grew more intense as my birthday approached. After weeks of cold shoulder from my dad, he suddenly tried to act rather amiably. He was seated at the kitchen table drinking coffee one morning when he suddenly says, "Hey, Alex, I was thinking maybe we could go fishing just the two of us this weekend." Like old times, fishing was something we used to do back when I was a child. Yet it had been years since we had really engaged in such activity together. I simply turned to him and said, maybe? I wasn't ready to fall for the whole, let's be buddies again charade. I had a lot ongoing in school. Not dumb after all he had put me through. I understood completely the true nature of things. Trying to sweeten me, he hoped I would soften up and turn over the money. Rachel was up to her own games while Dad was working the nice guy approach. I arrived home from school one day and found her in the living room surrounded by a lot of paperwork on the coffee table. At first, I hardly gave it much thought since she constantly works on some sort of documentation. Then I noticed one of the papers bore my name. She just gave me a phony smile and said, "Oh, just going over some legal stuff," when I asked her what she was doing. I said nothing, but I knew she was planning something. We want everything to be in order for her turning 18. I mentally noted to keep an eye on her since I wasn't about to let whatever she was intending slide. A few days later, they paid me another visit. Dad and Rachel sat down to give me it. I just gazed at Dad and said, "Dad, we've been over this. Once you have access to the money, you should consider helping Madison with her college costs. Not for her is the money, it's for me." Rachel, of course, stepped in and loaded on the guilt as usual. Mom and my grandparents set it up especially for me, and I am not sharing it. "Alex, though, you will have more money than you can ever need. Madison deserves a chance at a decent future. She has worked so hard. You could bring that about." I attempted to be calm by closing my jaw. "I understand, but I am not in charge of that. Work out how you and Dad might assist her, but I'm not handing over my fortune." Rachel's face flushed with resentment at that. Rising, she flung her hands in the air and began to circle the room. She exclaimed, "This is ridiculous. You are sitting on a wealth, and will simply save it all for yourself? What sort of individual does that?" I stared at her, then at Dad, who merely shook his head. "I've had enough." Rising, I departed feeling more sure than ever. I was not about to let them claim what was meant for me. Things become much more intense a few days following that conflict. My mother's attorney called me, which caught me off guard. I hadn't expected to hear from him until near my birthday. He sounded austere and informed me that my dad had been in touch looking for specifics on the trust fund. Dad apparently sought to find out whether there was any way to alter its configuration. My blood boiled during that hearing. One thing to try guilt-tripping me, but to go as far as attempting to tamper with the confidence my mother had built? That degree of treachery was completely different. I rang my grandfather straight after the call and told him everything. Not very happy to start with. "Don't worry, Alex," he reassured him. "Everything is tightly locked down here." That helped a little, but the whole scenario still left me boiling. Your dad cannot touch a dime of that money, and Rachel cannot either. This was about my dad defying my mom's wishes, that of our family, for his own benefit, not only about the money. Although I knew Rachel and he were having financial difficulties, I had assumed at least that they would value her legacy. Things just grew worse as my birthday drew near. Rachel hardly paid attention to me around. Madison, too. It seemed as though I no longer even belonged in the family. Every chat was brief and unpleasant, like they were merely waiting for me to become 18 and expecting I would miraculously have changed my mind. About 1 week before my birthday came the last straw. Once more, my dad came to see me. This time, he omitted Rachel. He seemed tired, as though he hadn't been sleeping, and I sensed he was ready to ask a major question. "Alex," he began, "I simply want to clear the air. Things have been strained around here. After giving this money matter a lot of thought, I realize it is yours. I truly do. I wanted to ask one last question before you decide, though I already knew what was coming." I let him talk. He groaned and said, "Alex, Madison's future rests on this. It would mean the world to her if you could only spare a small bit, enough to cover her first year of college. To all of us. It still amazes me. He continued to try to make me crack even after everything. But this time I hesitated hardly at all. "No," I responded with great conviction. "No, Dad, I am not doing this. Rachel and you have to work through this on your own. Madison's college or Jake's future is not under my purview." He didn't reply for a while. This is money for me, and I am not giving it away. He simply sat there, fixated on the floor as though he knew nothing else to do. At last he nodded. All he said was, "Okay, I get it." Then he left. I thought I might breathe once more for the first time in a very long time. I hadn't been about to back down. I had stayed firm. That evening, though, things started off differently. When I got home, my name was on a letter on the kitchen table. I got it from my dad. He wrote in it, "Alex, I know we haven't been seeing eye to eye, but everything I've done has been for the family. I hope you will change your mind before it is too late." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Rachel and I had talked about things. Maybe you should consider where you truly want to live if you are not willing to aid your siblings. Ultimately, he was truly threatening to kick me out after everything. Though I had seen guilt trips before, this was something else. This was worst kind of manipulation. That letter was like a line in the sand. I was about to let them drag me about no more. That evening, I realized I was not going to sit back and let them run over me. Dad, Rachel, Madison, even small Jake. I waited till everyone was home. Every one of us was seated in the living room, and I sensed conflict in the atmosphere. Though nobody was speaking, it was as though everyone knew what was ahead. Looking squarely at my dad, I added, "So, I found your letter." He nodded as expected, without looking startled. Rachel, on the other hand, looked at me smugly as though she believed they would have at last broken me down. "What then is the deal, Dad? If I give up some of my money, you truly will be kicking me out." I stared him down and asked. He sighed and massaged his temples as though he were the one enduring difficult circumstances. "Alex, it's not about kicking you off. It concerns being a member of this family." Frustrated, I shook my head, "And you have to realize that this money could help everyone. Help every one of us. Alternatively, assist Rachel and Madison so they do not have to worry about his college expenses. To be honest, you are not doing this for me." Rachel leaped in, not missing a beat, seeing my inheritance as a means of escape from your issues. "That is untrue, Alex. Though you have an opportunity to aid your brother and sister, they are not my responsibility. We have always desired what is best for you." I shut her off, louder than I intended. I felt horrible when I saw Jake shudder a little, but right now I was not backing down. I set aside this money for myself. Mom took care to confirm that. Madison decided to pipe in, her tone full of hostility, realizing she had other children to think about and could not just treat me like I owe you. Alex, you're being selfish, not as though you will even need all that money. Why are you unable to just offer assistance? Turning to her, I tried to remain cool, but hardly succeeded. Madison, you are not entitled to my money. Not one of you is. This is my future. I'm not allowing you or anybody else to take it from me. I don't care how hard you've worked or what ambitions you have. The room went quiet. Though he merely glanced at the floor, shaking his head, my dad seemed like he wanted to say something. Rachel, though, wasn't done. Her eyes ablaze with rage, she turned straight for me. Maybe your dad was right if you find it difficult to see how badly you are damaging this family. Perhaps it's time you move somewhere else for residence. What I was hearing surprised me. Since I wouldn't turn up money that wasn't even hers to start with, my own stepmom was essentially urging me to get out. I turned to my dad, expecting he would intervene and warn her she had gone too far. He merely sat there, though, not speaking. It dawned on me at that. This was not going to finish nicely. Their pause was not going to halt. They would keep pushing until they got what they wanted or until I was no longer relevant, regardless of how many times I turned down. I got up, my head whirling. Though another part of me was just tired, part of me wanted to scream at them, tell them all to screw off. Weary of all the conflict, of the guilt trips, of feeling as though I was the evil man in my own house. One last time, I turned to see my dad. This is it then? I won't give you the money, so you truly will toss me out, . That was it. He didn't look up, he just murmured, I don't want to do this, Alex, but you're not leaving us much of a choice. I stopped. Fine, I answered, slightly wavering in voice. I will leave. I turned and left without waiting for a reply, though, not expecting to be back. Not even did I organize my stuff right then. I left recently. On the way to their house, I phoned my grandparents to let them know what had transpired. Furious, they instructed me to stay with them as long as I required. That brought great relief. But I couldn't stop feeling a strange mix of grief and wrath as I turned away from the house. Knowing that my own dad would pick money above me hurt. Simultaneously, though, I realized I couldn't continue living that way. I had to find myself, even if it meant saying farewell to my family. The next few days passed rather like a haze. Most of my stuff went to my grandparents' house, and they kept reminding me over and over that I had done the right thing. Nevertheless, it was still difficult. I felt like I had lost something, even though my dad had essentially kicked me out. It felt like a weird sort of betrayal, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. One thing was very evident, though. I was not going to sacrifice my future for them. With my birthday just days away, it felt like everything was about to change. I was not going to let their avarice rule me. And this time I understood I had to be ready for anything that was ahead. At last, my 18th birthday arrived. Rising in the house of my grandparents, I felt as though this day would always be hovering over me. This was it. The day I would formally be allowed access to the trust fund my grandparents and mother had created for me. Though part of me was hoping for some significant, dramatic change, really it felt like every other day. Except for the fact that I was now, theoretically, in charge of a life-changing sum of money. My grandfather was already there, grinning at me with the trust fund paperwork spread out on the table when I descended to the kitchen. For a moment, everything seemed quiet and normal. Like all the drama from the past year was finally behind me, my grandma was cooking breakfast. I felt relief, like I was at last free, and they were both quite happy for me. Naturally, however, things were never that straightforward. Not quite half an hour into my birthday, my phone started buzzing. Naturally, I looked at the screen and found my dad. Since I left, I hadn't communicated with him. Honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to. A tiny bit of me, though, was holding out, hoping he would call to make things right, perhaps even an apology. Alert. He wasn't phoning to apologize. I grabbed hold, and before I could even say hello, he started right in. Alex, we should have a conversation. Not even a happy birthday, but rather straightforward business. I groaned and asked, "What's up, Dad?" He wasted no time at all. "Based on what Rachel and I have been thinking, we truly think you should change your mind on the money. Though this affects the entire family, we know you feel it is yours." I couldn't believe we were back to square one. I have already clearly stated several times. On my birthday of all days, though, he was here trying to uncover the same argument, trying to keep cool. "Dad," I said, "we've been over this. Neither Rachel nor I are handing you any of the money. That's final. It's mine." He continued without even considering what I had said. "Look, Alex, you have to be wise about this, even though it marks a significant event for you. You want to avoid burning ties with your family over money." I tightened my jaw, trying not to lose it. "I wouldn't give you the money, thus you kicked me out, Dad. I was not burning bridges here. That was you." For a moment, the other end was silent. He was trying to control himself, and I could hear him laboring heavily. At last he said, "I didn't kick you out. You decided to go." I almost laughed. "You advised me to figure out where I wanted to live should I refuse to share the money. What was my expected course of action?" He stopped once more, then tried one last plea. "Look, there is no need for a major struggle here. We are able to arrange things. I'd had enough. Perhaps help Madison through her first year of college and we can all move past this." My heart thumping, I felt as though I might blow. "Dad, I'm done. I am done with all of this. You're not getting any money. If you cannot accept that, then we have nothing else to discuss." And I hung up before he could say anything else. I sat there for a few moments trying to calm down. This was supposed to be my day, but of course my dad had to drag me back into the same argument we'd been having for months. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, waiting for things to get better with him. It was clear that to him and Rachel, the money was more important than anything else. If they couldn't see past that, then there was no point in holding out hope that things would ever be normal again. After that call, I sat down with my grandparents and told them everything. They'd been incredibly supportive through all of this, but I could see the worry on their faces. My grandpa, always the practical one, looked me in the eye and said, "Alex, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about your relationship with your dad. You need to decide if you're willing to cut ties or if you're going to keep trying to make things right." He was right. I'd been holding on to this idea that somehow, once the money was officially mine, everything would just magically work itself out. But that wasn't going to happen. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to give my dad or Rachel a single cent no matter what, and if that meant cutting them out of my life, then so be it. A few days later, I got a call from Madison. At first, I almost didn't answer. I figured it was just going to be more of the same. But curiosity got the best of me, and I picked up. To my surprise, she sounded different. No attitude, no guilt trips. She just said, "Hey Alex, can we talk?" I was cautious but replied, "Sure, what's up?" She sighed. "Look, I know things have been rough between us lately, and I get that you don't want to give me any money. I'm not here to argue with you about that. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for how things turned out." I didn't expect that at all. Thanks, I guess." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I never wanted things to get this bad. I know I was being entitled, and that wasn't fair to you. I don't know. I guess I was desperate because college is expensive, and I thought maybe you'd help me out. But I get it now. It's your money, and you don't owe me anything." Part of me wanted to tell her off, but another part of me appreciated that she was at least acknowledging how messed up things had gotten. "Thanks for saying that," I finally said. "This whole situation stinks and I wish it hadn't gone down this way, but it is what it is." Madison sighed again. "Yeah, I know. Anyway, I just wanted to express that. I'm still upset, but I guess I'll work something out for college." We didn't talk much after that, but it felt like some kind of closure. It didn't repair anything, but at least she wasn't trying to shame me into giving her money anymore. After then, things got a lot quieter. My dad stopped calling, and Rachel, well, I knew she wasn't going to reach out anytime soon. I stayed with my grandparents for a while, and they helped me build up a plan for managing the money wisely. I didn't want to blow through it or make any bad judgments, so they linked me with a financial advisor who talked me through everything. It felt strange. Here I was, just 18, with more money than most people make in a lifetime. It didn't feel like a victory, though. It seemed like I'd lost something vital in the process, my relationship with my dad. Simultaneously, though, I realized I had to stop allowing them to rule me. I was not about to let them take anything from me. This money was my future. I began organizing, considering college, perhaps even launching a business. It was a wonderful sensation, as, for the first time in months, I felt as though I was really in charge of my life. Regarding my dad, I have no idea if we will ever be at peace. Perhaps he will come to see what he lost by putting money above our friendship someday. Not quite sure. Either way, one thing is clear. I am not allowing anyone to take away what my parents and grandparents labor so hard to provide me. Right now, this is my life, and I shall live it on my terms. And should that imply moving on without them, well, so let it be.